Hey everyone, let's start. So here were last time, we were discussing entry barriers and what makes monopolists monopolists. So we have discussed entry barriers, which are natural versus created. So natural meaning usually there are high fixed costs, which lead to natural monopolies, such as hydroquake, or created, which would be patents or copyrights, this sort of things, which are artificial but intended, so with the purpose of motivating creation, motivating innovation. And then network effects. So this is the one of the most powerful entry barrier you can have, because once a network is set up and has many users, then it's just so hard for another new network to come and rival it, because everybody's on the first one. So if you join the second one, then you're by yourself. Yeah, so this is a link to network effects. So the benefits to the users depend on how many other people use the network. And so, so that's a powerful entry barrier that helps sustain monopoly profits. So the first example must have been the telephone. So because once they use your line, then you're good, and everybody's using the same line, the same network. So try competing with a new network of telephone. That's very hard. And incidentally, that's we don't realize it, but the telephone has huge fixed cost. So what do poorer countries try to do? Since the telephone has very high fixed cost. Yeah, well, yeah, many countries did that in the past, for instance. But nowadays, yeah, it's so in many instances they you just skip it, because it's bringing the lines out there in the countryside for poor villages is just very expensive, and then they realize that, oh, people don't need it anymore anyways, because they all have cell phones. So they were able to just skip ahead and not install telephone, because we think everybody has it, but no, in many poor countries they didn't have. So. Yes, so fixed line. And by the way, we are having the same problem for internet in poor regions in many places. Say Quebec, they still have slow internet because, again, the problem is it's not that we think they're second-rate citizens or anything. It's just it's very expensive to bring a high-speed cable there. So then, what do they do? Or yeah, but still the cell phone coverage might not be so good. But so now they're going to be able to do to use what Elon Musk has just created, so satellite internet. which is called Starlink. Starlink is expensive, but in some instances, it's less expensive to use this rather than to just wait forever to have high-speed internet. So this is back to the network thing. So another part of, another instance of network I could have is other version of, well, no, I shouldn't do that. I shouldn't try this. Another instance in which you have barriers to change is if you have an ecosystem, like you have all Mac users that use the same messaging app, for instance. So then they don't think that they could change, for instance. So they stay with the same thing because their friends who use Mac won't change. So so my dream world would be a world in which you could put all the apps together in one. So you would have WhatsApp and Messenger and all of these just in one, and you can just, your Facebook feed and all the rest, just to browse and see the message of everybody. So that's just so much simpler. Of course, our Facebook or Microsoft or all the others willing to do that? Well, of course not, because that would mean that they lose their power over us. So they want to lock people in their network so that they cannot change. So that's the world we are stuck with. It's not that bad, but it's not the best. Okay, so are monopolies good or bad? So as we've seen so far, they don't look so good because they make production lower than it should be, and they create deadweight losses. So they reduce the surplus of consumers by a lot to increase the firm profit by a big margin. However, there is this economist, which so you see, he lived a long time ago, who defended monopolies. So he was writing with at the same time as Karl Marx and all the others old school economists. And so he created this concept of creative destruction, in which he said, well, monopolists aren't that bad because what they are trying to do is always be a step ahead of their competitors by innovating. So what they do is they use their pure profit created on the market by exploiting consumers, but they don't just sit there and enjoy margaritas. What they do is they innovate and they improve technology, improve research, so that in the end, they are much more productive. And so society is moving forward. So for firms that get replaced, it's not that good, but for firms that get to for consumers, in the end, they are better off because yes, monopoly power and lack of competition keeps prices a bit higher, but technology does bring down prices a lot. So that's on the one hand you lose, but on the other hand you gain. And so he was on the opinion that they gain better than that. Yes. So use this quote, but we have to accept that monopoly has come to be the most powerful engine of progress, in particular the long-run expansion of total output, not only in spite of, but to a considerable extent through the strategy of creating monopolies, which looks so restrictive when viewed in the individual case and from the individual point in time. So that was his time. So what about monopolies today? We still try to fight them as much as possible. So, but it's difficult. The European Union has been quite more stringent in making firms not say become monopolies by merging with some other big firm on the market, and make sure that competition is healthy. A good instance of this is actually is actually the cell phones and the internet providers. So I don't know if you know, but one of the countries in the world in which internet and cell phones are the most expensive is or has been for like 10 years. You know which country? Canada. Our services are extremely bad and extremely expensive if you compare that to Europe. And why is that? Well, because we have two big players. We have Videotron and Bell, and that's it. So, and it looks like we have Fizz or other stuff, but they're just sort of subsidiaries of Videotron and Bell. So the tariffs never go down. And if you go to Europe, you have contracts like €1 per month. You have crazy cheap contracts with very good service because and part of it is that they have a big number of potential users, but that doesn't explain why the same can be observed in the US. So in the US too, they have, say, Comcast or some big players, and their service is usually terrible and extremely expensive. So the US, they claim to be pro-market and pro-competition and pro-profit, but in the end, they are pro-profit, yes. So if you are a big firm and you have a big profit, then you're able to pressure your local officials to please not allow you to compete too much against competition. But yeah, they're not super pro competition. So they've had a history of having huge monopolies. So if you think about the robber barons in just around this time, around the turning of the 20th century, that were extremely powerful. And yes, so Europe is much more inclined to fight the big monopolies. That's Europe also that fought Microsoft when they tried to. Well, so you might be too young to remember, but at some point Microsoft pre-installed Explorer with their exploitation system Windows, and then back then Netscape was the primary internet provider, and they just killed Netscape with that because people don't think twice, and then they just use what's already installed, and that's it. And so I don't know how many people are using Bing among you. Bing, no? Who's using Bing? No, nobody? Well, so it looks like it's a big failure, but no, it isn't. Because it's every time you update Windows, that's oftentimes that's the default browser. And many people just don't think too much about it, and they use internet once in a while, and they use Bing. So Bing has a very big market share. It has nothing to do with being good. It's just the default option. So yeah, these things are still going on right now. All right. So this code is sort of not too clear, so I'm just going to to clarify this. So what he's saying is monopolies use pure profit hedge prediction by innovating. So lack of competition makes higher prices, but better technology. So that would be the gist of it. The way we would express it in a modern. Okay, cartel. So cartel is a whole different story because with cartel, what we're now saying is that we don't have one firm, we have many firms. So generally in economics classes, we deal with cartel when we look at competition in many firms. However, it's not all that bad to put it here for the following reason, is that cartel are in or a small group of firms. And what do they do? Well, they want to recreate what a monopolist would do exactly by colluding. By colluding. Not competing. Each other. So if you look at our yes, oh, okay. So why do you like OPEC all that much? Is there somebody who's fan of OPEC? So do you know what OPEC is? Yeah, c'est yes, it's
oil producing and exporting.
or organization of petroleum exporting countries. Yeah. So why do I say it's my favorite cartel? Well, because as you may know, we are having some issue with the climate. And part of it is due to CO2 emissions and the burning of fossil fuels, especially in cars. So how would you address this? Well, we haven't seen it already, but a big way in which we can do that is by taxing gas or innovating or in other ways, but especially so anything that can bring up the price of gas so that people decide it's too expensive and they use something else. Unfortunately, in many regions, so that they do that a lot in Europe. Unfortunately, in many regions of the world, especially in the US, they don't, well, up to recently at least, they didn't care all that much about it and wanted to keep oil prices as low as possible. But in recent years, well, recent years, since 1971, I think, so OPEC has decided that they would reduce their production and hike their prices so that they would rake as much money as possible. So they are extremely wealthy. So they could basically have 80% of their population not working almost, and things would be fine. So maybe I'm exaggerating, but yes, they are very wealthy. But the upside is that we're using less gas than we would otherwise, and we have more fuel efficient cars than we would otherwise. So, I'm sure that they really don't care for 2 cents about the environment, they just care about profit, but the good aspect of that is that we have a cleaner air. What are the problem with OPEC or the challenges to OPEC? So OPEC is an organization. Oh, incentives to cheat. Yes. Yes, I would say they stay in line. But so in general, that's something we're going to talk about. Yes. So good point. But so the problem with OPEC is that it's not a club that encompasses all petroleum exporting countries. So Russia is sort of aligned with them, but not always. Sometimes they just decide to export more and that's it. The US doesn't care all that much about OPEC anyways, and they just use fracking to produce oil themselves. And back in 2008, 17, 18, they were actually a net exporter of oil, which is very surprising. But yes, they fracked so much that they had enough oil to export. Canada doesn't care about OPEC. So Venezuela, I think, is part of them. So somebody could check that.
Yeah, that's what it is.
Yeah. Okay. So what's the result? So they cannot hike the price as much as they would. Yeah, so that's the risk in a cartel. So the risk is that somebody is not going to want to play ball and restrict their production like you are. So then what you're doing is you're letting money on the table while some other countries or some other players, some other firm in the market exploit the, the space that you left out, and they just produce and produce and produce. So that's what the US was doing. Incidentally, the US, from what I've heard, they never really made any profit out of fracking because it's still very expensive to do. So they were hoping that technology would improve things, but yeah, the whole industry never really took off. Or it did take off, but it never, yeah, it was, they never managed to really make a big profit out of it. Maybe they will in the future, who knows. Another example of cartel, so there was, yeah, the bread cartel. Yeah, you have cartels of anything, right? So anytime you have some product that looks more or less homogeneous, there's a big risk there's a cartel there. So that was Weston and Loblaw. So that's a good old Canadian cartel that they got busted a few years ago, maybe 10 years ago or more. Yeah. So yeah, anytime you have some products that for which yeah you're able somehow to just look at each other and say, okay, let's restrict production, hike prices, so nobody's going to. In the US, sugar is the price of sugar is controlled, and the thing with sugar is you don't really think about it, so you just buy your sugar and you use a bit in the morning, and that's it. So you think, oh, who cares about a few cents more or less? Well, they do. They make a whole lot of profit just by setting the price a bit higher than marginal cost, and they're able to make a lot of profit out of it. Yes, thing is, it's not exact. So there's the same thing. It's not like a monopoly. So they're hiking price and just restricting output for sure. Thing is, it would be a cartel if we would somehow, I don't know, collude with Vermont and other. Yeah, but at the province level, definitely that's what they do. What else? Oh yes, so a nice one was leasing cartel, the price fixing. So look at this movie, The Informant. A nice, fun movie with early movies of Matt Damon. So yeah, it's a very funny movie, and yeah, he's an informant who was. So we're going to see later that what the problem with cartels is two things. One, they are afraid that one is going to not go ahead and just yeah, produce much more. So essentially, backstab the other member of the cartel. And the other problem is that it's oftentimes illegal. So so for OPEC, is that illegal? Well, there's no world law or UN law that says that you cannot form a cartel with other countries. So they're just doing whatever they like. But within countries, usually cartels are illegal. And so when you take part of a price fixing collusion, then your biggest scare, or one of your biggest scare, is that somebody's going to rat on you and you're going to jail, and you can go to jail for many years. So that's oftentimes what happens with cartels. So they break because somebody just talks to the police, and yeah, this leasing price fixing scandal that's made in the Informant movie is exactly that. It's somebody who has some other problem that's unrelated to them being part of the cartel, but then they freak out and they say, I'm going to go to the police and tell them that, oh yeah, by the way, I know this, so please don't send me to jail. Yes, I recommend it. Yes, so just to go back to this graph there. So this is the same graph as what we've seen for monopolies. So if cartel members decide to produce as in perfect competition, then they would choose marginal cost equal demand, and we would have a high production and a low price. But then what they realize is that they can collectively produce much less to QM. So the quantity that some single firm that would be a monopolist would choose in the market and charge a very high price and make pure profits. So here the profits are definitely zero, or not zero, but very low. It depends on the fixed cost. But if you charge this very high price, then you probably get much higher profits. And then the whole goal is then to divide the profits among each other. Tobacco companies are yeah, it's possible. By the way, so if you're very smart and want to continue in economics, one way to make lots of money, really lots of money, is go work for a big company that's accused of being inside a cartel. You go to court and you say, yeah, let me show you my model, and I can definitely show to the court that it's not true that Microsoft has an unfair advantage on the market because of blah, blah, blah. Microsoft is going to pay you millions of dollars for sure, because they tend to lose so much if, so say for instance, the North American authorities or the European authorities ask them to split up the firm or to not merge with somebody else. Yeah, so that's very lucrative occupation for economists. And I'm not talking about the moral aspect of it, just the lucrative aspect of it. All right. So as I was saying, so cartel members do have avocado cartel. Oh, I didn't know that. Yeah, many cartels. So this is what would happen for inside a cartel if some member wanted to take advantage of the other. So first of all, if there is no cartel, what they would do is, so we would be a situation where Q0 is produced, P0 is the market price. This is for the whole market. You see the downward sloping demand curve. And this is what a single market member would see. Now the big, oh yeah, by the way, I forgot about this, so I put it here. So this is the movie poster. I put them together. All right. Okay, so this assumes that the cartel members are very, very tiny. In all actuality, that's not the case. So because it's almost impossible to have a collusion conspiracy with 100 people or 1,000 people. There's always someone who's going to cheat or go to the police. The only way cartels can work is with being like 3, 4, 5, 6 max. Otherwise, it breaks apart. It's like any conspiracy. But here, this is for modeling purposes. So here we assume that this firm is very, very small. So here's what happens. So if the firm produces, if we're in perfect competition, then and in the long-term equilibrium, then you have the market price is P0, and the firm produces such that marginal cost equals price equals the minimum of the average total cost. So for that firm, there is no profit. But then being part of a cartel, every cartel member is invited to lower their production and hike the price so that at the market level, you see that the new price is not P0, but P1. But then what this means is that you get a much lower production. But you see that at this lower production, you have some nice hefty profit, which is so P1 minus the average total cost at this quantity Q1 times Q1. So this will be there. So it's not all that here. So let me just, this is perfect. If cartel member I'm just going to write it this way. But then what you can see is, of course, what happens if that at the new price P1, that cartel member does what it likes. Well, it's going to produce until price P1 equals marginal cost. And so it's going to get this huge profit there. This green box there. So this is profit for cartel member. So how would you make this slightly more realistic? Well, the way I would do it is that the demand faced by the cartel member shouldn't be completely elastic. It should be downward sloping, not as downward sloping as the demand for all of the market, because here you have all the members. Here you have a single member, but so that member doesn't have the production power to produce for the whole market, but still you should have something like a downward sloping demand curve for that from there. But it makes things simpler to put it this way. Oh yeah, so I forgot one important cartel, two example of cartel. What? Yes, exactly. And the thing is, I just watched yesterday an episode of what was it? It's called Cartel, the TV show. It's a nice TV show on Netflix about Colombian cartels, and then there's a Mexican cartel too, so drug cartels. So what's the incentive of being part of a cartel? Well, because if everybody does their own thing on their side, then pretty fast they are going to run out running into the territory of the other guy, and then they're going to start shooting at each other. So that TV show just tells the story of one Mexican ex-policeman actually who decided to create a whole Mexican cartel for drug and became super wealthy because if there is peace, then you can just sell drug at will and no violence. And yeah. So drug is a very good place in which you should make cartel. All right, so questions about these graphs there? Is it so Q0 is the initial perfect competition case. Q1 is what each member does for the cartel to restrict production, but then Q2 is what they do when they cheat, and then they get a much higher profit. And so there are many ways to modeling this incentive to cheat for cartel members, but so this is a neat one. Okay, so as I was saying, any firm within the cartel has incentive to cheat. So by cheating, and so or yeah, very close to it. It's just the cartel price. Yeah, that's the problem with this this thing there is if the cartel member does increase production a lot, then it's not, you wouldn't still be able to sell at P1 because you're flooding the market with your merchandise. So of course that would decrease the price a bit. So, but we say it's it's close to the market, to the cartel price P1. But the problem, of course, is if all firms cheat, then the price falls back toward the competitive level, and joint profit will not be maximized. So for society, it's pretty good if cartel members cheat. That means that we get a better price. Oh, by the way, some other instance in which we think there might be collusion, but we can never be sure, is a gas station. Because in many instances, for some reason, just when there's a vacation and everybody needs their car, whoops, gas prices go up. So as an economist, again, it's very difficult to make the case that this is collusion, because if there's a lot of demand for oil, then of course the price is going to go up. Or if there is a war somewhere, then and crude oil the distribution of crude oil is disturbed, then of course everybody is going to feel this because they have a higher cost to pay. So you cannot really say that if all gas stations hike prices at the same time, it means collusion. However, my own opinion, I wouldn't rule it out. So perhaps they do, perhaps they don't. Because it's just, yeah, again, you don't really need to collude. You just have to say, oh, let's just do what my neighbor does, and whoops, we get a higher collective, nice higher price. But then if you're a gas station and you cheat, so you let the price be lower than it would be otherwise, then you can get all these extra clients that are going to go to your gas station instead. So I know, maybe they do, maybe they don't. And yeah, so if they all cheat, then it goes back down. Successful cartel must be able to prevent the entry of new producers. So that's a problem. G4? Yes, they do use a powerful means to prevent to prevent a new entry on their territory. And that's the thing, is you don't want competition on your territory. You want to be sure that in this part of the city, then you're the only one who's selling the stuff. If you're a junkie and you really want to pay less for your drug, you would have to drive a few blocks away to get it. So yeah, it's all about control. Yes, another country that doesn't care about OPEC is of course Norway. They are very rich. No? Successful cartels are often able to license the firms in the industry and to control entry by restricting the number of licenses. So this is super interesting and also a problem, potential problem. So let me write it here. So not everybody agrees with that, but yeah, so yeah, Thomas Léger. He's a professor at HEC Montréal. Doctors are a cartel. Why? Because they control students in medical school. Control the number of students in medical school and decide how licenses for recognize or not. Incentive, so their incentive is to have a permanent shortage of doctors, which makes total sense. So if you want your members to still remain rich and to be very well paid, then what you want to do is restrict the supply of doctors so that the Quebec government always have to pay whatever they ask because they don't have any other alternatives. So it's especially true for probably radiologists who get paid a very, very hefty price. So you might have heard in the news recently that now the Legault government is trying to go against them for some other reason. But yes, so that could be a cartel too. So not all economists agree, but a certain number of them agree with that. Yeah, so yeah, exactly. So they can control. Yeah. So one thing, of course, that they should have written. So problems that face cartel is since is so risk getting cut. Also, generally, like for many other sorts of crimes, so police, or let's just say law enforcement, will reduce sentences for members held on their extra incentive. Yeah, to talk to the police. In Europe, also they have this policy that if you are the one who's going to denounce your co-conspirators, then you have maybe you don't go to jail whatsoever. By the way, somebody knows what this sort of situation is. So there's this. Have you heard of game theory? Yeah, and there's a special game that's based on that. No, so the game is it's called the Prisoner's Dilemma. Looks like this. Yeah, so and so the game is the following. So two people get caught, but they don't have enough proofs, so they cannot send them to jail for like 10 years unless one admits of the crime. So what they say is they say, okay, well, here's the thing: if none of you talk, then you go to jail for 1 year. If one of you talks, then you're free to go. But if your colleague talks and you don't talk, then you go to like jail for 20 years. And if both of you talk on the other, then you just go to jail for 10 years. And it turns out that there's a single best strategy in this case is to always talk against your conspirator. If both of them didn't talk at all, they would just have a very, very small sentence. But it's always better to just so if your colleague doesn't talk, then and you talk, then you go free. And if your colleague talks and you talk, then you get 10 years instead of 20. So that's what we call a dominant strategy. I don't remember if we introduced game theory in this class, but yeah, it's a big, important topic in economics, which is super fun. So I hope you get to learn some of it later. All right. So that's cartels. Any other questions about that? No? Yeah, so Prisoner's Dilemma is another way in which, so it's the same idea basically. It's so they make it so that cartel members have a big incentive to tell on their neighbor. And by the way, the same thing happens with, in this case, this you could say is Prisoner's Dilemma as well, because if the other cartel members maintain the cartel, you have incentive to cheat. And if they cheat on you and produce too much, then you also have incentive to produce more and cheat as well. So you always have incentive to cheat. So that's the same situation as Prisoner's Dilemma. So we're going to see this more, maybe, so I'm pretty sure you're going to see Prisoner's Dilemma at least once. All right. Price discrimination, that's also a super interesting topic. So what's price discrimination? Well, it's what happens when a monopoly is able to charge more than a single price. So as we've seen, single price monopoly leads to inefficiency because the monopolist knows that if the monopolist wants to increase production, the only way is to reduce the price on the all of the other sold units. So there's a trade-off. So what they are going to do is restrict production. But if you don't have this problem, if you can charge whatever you like to whoever you're selling to, then you don't have any problem. You can decide the price for one set of units and decide the price for one other set of units. And so we're going to see that this is actually, from a purely efficiency point of view, it's more efficient. Of course, it means that the monopolist is going to have so much more profit, and it's just the best for that. So it's not nice for consumers, but from an economics perspective, it's perfectly good. Yeah, so this price discrimination, what does that mean? It's the sell-off by one firm of different units per product at two or more different prices for reasons that are not associated with costs. So it's not because so it's only reason. So of course, if you have a higher marginal price of selling, so imagine, for instance, I sell some production locally in Canada and I export some of it to Mexico, then of course my price is going to be higher in Mexico just for the sheer fact that I have to pay this transportation cost. So that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about in situation in which it would be perfectly possible for me to sell at the same price. But if I'm able to, I choose not to and make more profit. Yeah, so if price differences reflect cost differences, then they are not discriminatory. But if price differences are based on different buyers' valuations of the same product, then they are discriminatory. And so when is price discrimination possible? You have many conditions that have to occur. Market power. So it means that it's either a monopoly or oligopoly. Oligopoly is when you have a few firms that have market power on the market. Now we're going to see this in the next chapter. Don't worry about that. But essentially, you need market power. Otherwise, there's no way you can do it. Then you need consumers with different valuations of the same product. Otherwise, if they all have the same demand, then there's just no way to exploit it. But actually, there is always different valuation of the product, simply because if you produce a very small amount, then the price is going to be very high. So really, the problem is, so I would say 4. And so there is no arbitrage. So it means that consumers cannot buy cheap and resell. It's because otherwise, if that was the case, then whatever the effort you make at price discrimination, if for some reason you sell to some person at a very low price, you hope you're able to sell to a high price to some other person. But if that person is just able to buy more and go back and to that other person and sell it, then you're not going to make any money at it. But for the very important aspect is the ability to distinguish between segments. And this is the whole thing. It's the ability to see that to see that, or the ability to actually do it. So to sell high to somebody and sell low to somebody else. So it might seem abstract as I'm doing writing it right now, but don't worry, it's going to become much more concrete. So here I have added some. So let's start with that one. Price discrimination among units. So a firm captures the consumer surplus by charging different prices for different units sold. So this is also, I think, what they refer to here is sometimes called the first degree discrimination. And so I think we're going to start with this. Yeah, so this would be first degree discrimination. So here's what you do. So if you sell at a uniform price, so imagine you choose marginal cost equals demand, you don't have competition, then what happens is, I'm going to remove it later, but so you sell at the same price all of your units. But so as we know, the first person who's going to buy it, if so, the person would buy it if the quantity sold was very low, would have this huge surplus because would have been ready to pay this much, and you're selling to just that much. So this is all going as surplus to the consumer. It makes the person very happy. Then the second person there, less happy, less happy, less happy, until you get to the end where that person is basically indifferent between buying and not buying, because that was the willingness to pay for the item, and that was the price that they paid. But the first discrimination means that I'm able to sell whatever unit at whatever price I choose. So what am I doing? Well, I'm not choosing a uniform price. I'm going to look at my first unit there for, let's say, Q1, and say, oh, you're ready to pay that much? Okay, so that's your price. You pay me that much to buy it. And then the second quantity Q2, the second person is a bit less ready to pay for it. So, okay, well, I'm going to reduce my price for you, but still sell high for the first person, and so on and so forth. So essentially what you're doing there is appropriating all of the consumer surplus for you. And you're, of course, making a lot of money doing this. So in our countries, like say Canada, the US, or Europe, we tend to think, well, of course, there is one price. Everybody sells at that price. Yeah. So that's our consumption of markets. But go to a place where people bargain, and you're going to see what happens. So they pretty much when you enter the store, or when you just arrive at that person, then they look at you and they say, how much can I extract from that person? And if you're dressed too well, and you look like a rich person, so they're going to come up with the price that's appropriate for you, and probably you're going to be in that range there. So, yeah. One example is I went to Greece once, and so I was traveling with a lady who had a lot of money, and she said, "Oh, how much for that necklace? It looks nice." So he said, "Oh, 200 euros." So she was very mad that she, because for me it was just not super expensive, but he thought, okay, she looks like she has a lot of money, she's on vacation, so let's go for it, and suggest a very high price. So yeah, people bargain all the time. And what they're trying essentially is extract as much of the surplus as the other from the other person as possible. Yeah, so that would be first degree discrimination. And I'm not done with that thing there. So I'm going to discuss what this means in terms of market efficiency. Price discrimination among market segments. So if it's yeah, by the way, first degree discrimination is something that is more theoretical. So why? Well, because you never know exactly just by looking at the eyes of the person, oh, that person is indifferent between paying 200 euros or not buying it. So that's the price is going to be 200 euros. So you cannot know. You cannot preserve the exact willingness to pay of each customer. And of course, cannot prevent arbitrage. By which I mean, at some point, if that was the case, then the person next door would just come in the store and say, "Oh, this is my willingness to pay. Please send them to me," and then go back to the other person there and go, "Oh, say, don't pay that much. I give you the same bargain at say P2." So then they would pocket the difference between P2 and PM, and yeah, so you cannot do that. Thankfully, otherwise that would be a dystopian world. Yeah, but so more concretely, what do firms do? So price discrimination among market segments is a big one. So if they can distinguish different market segments by detecting an individual consumer's willingness to pay based on some characteristics. For different product units of that. Yeah, so market segment is there. So what we mean by this? Well, price for young, old, for different countries, for home country versus foreign countries. So that's what economists would call dumping. So you set a high price for your local buyers, and then you sell low for foreign buyers. Yeah, so many different things. Yeah. Yeah, more. Yeah, so I'm going to explain that really quick.
Let's say you have like
I really don't know what you're doing. You already know everything. So it's not even listed as a sort of price discrimination, but that's a very important one, which I'm going to talk about shortly. Yeah, so this briefly is based on market different market segments. So here, what is this? That's IKEA prices around the world. So that's IKEA prices on the lower graph there, and this is GDP per capita. So you would expect that IKEA should be perhaps selling this always at the same price, or at different price based on how expensive it is to export them. But so IKEA, I think they're mostly producing their goods in Vietnam or something. So it shouldn't really be, there shouldn't be a big difference between all these countries. And yet, so this is the price that you pay in different regions of the world. So as you can see, IKEA prices are relatively expensive in Canada, very cheap in the US, hugely expensive in Australia, and the Australians have actually complained to IKEA, why do you make prices so high for us? So somebody has a reason, as an explanation why IKEA prices are so low in the US and so high in Australia. Yeah. Yeah, of course. Yeah. So more people buy, you would say, so they have a higher volume of production, then? They are very what? They consume too much. No, but if they have a higher demand, then that would drive the price up. Yes?
Because Australia has like so there's limited so IKEA can pretty much other firms.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So what's the problem with Australia is they don't have a lot of alternatives. So for IKEA, they say, "Oh, you don't want our furniture? Oh, all right, we don't sell it to you, and you can just go home and not have a chair or a table." So if you're the only game in town, then you get to set your price. But in the US, there are so many other alternatives to IKEA that so competition is more fierce. So it looks more like perfect competition for furniture in the US compared to Australia and for Russia. So that's yeah, that's competition based on different market segments. So young and old can pretty much know. So if you're young, you get to pay less, and if you're very old, you get to pay less. Different countries. So yeah, I had other examples. Help me, somebody help me. Other examples of this. Pink tax, coupons. For and oh yeah, I had another one. Yeah. So but now. All right. So let me show you my other example. So it's also based on for people at home. I'm going to share this. All right. So I was in France, and I was curious because sometimes we had to rent some cars for guests. And so what we would usually do is go to some go and to rent the cars at the airport. So the Rennes airport is super tiny and it's very close to where I was working. And so this is what you got when so when you go and so actually yeah. So you move to rental cars, and then you say, okay, I'm looking for a car to rent and at the airport, and that's the screen that they're showing to you. Nous comparons les tarifs de toutes les grandes sociétés de location de voitures pour trouver les meilleures offres. So we're comparing tariffs to try and find the best offer for you. So why are they showing you this? Is it useful for you to see the screen? Well, it doesn't serve any purpose other than to sort of suggest to you that there is competition, that they are trying really to look for each brand and find the best competition, that the best car brand that they can find. But then once they have done that, this is what you get. So you get essentially a single brand, so Alamo in here. And that's what you get. So 196.95 euros for 3 days, which I think is outrageously expensive. But yeah, that's what you have to pay if you're French. But then the question is, what if you're not French? What if you are a tourist on vacation and you're trying to find the cheapest car? So what would you get as a price? So what I did is I changed my browser and I used the VPN and decided to look at what the price would be if I was from Montreal. And then this is what I get from an IP in Montreal. So exact same car. So that's obviously not a different car, it's the same car. But then the company looks like it's changed, but it's just the same Rennes airport. And look at the price, it's 51.68 euros. That the price was 196. Here is 51.68. Plus here you get unlimited mileage. So that's just a crazy discrimination. If you think what we're doing here is theoretical, no, it's super practical. Next time you rent something, check and see if you can change your IP address and use a VPN and change your location. Can make a huge difference. Yeah, so that's again based on location, but also on something else here. So what they're thinking probably is if we are in Rennes in my school and we are having a guest and I'm in charge of renting a car, am I really going to shop around and waste time to look for the best, cheapest way to get around for my guest? No, I don't care. I'm not the person paying. My school is paying. I'm just the agent that's going to rent. So they do that and they say, oh, well, we're just going to give you a very good price for you personally. And we know that we don't really care about money all that much. But if you're a tourist and you're really thinking, oh, should I get around in bus or in train or rent a car, then they know that your demand is much more elastic. You're much more reactive to price, so they know they cannot extract as much money from you as they would from other people. All right. So how many slides do I still have? Yes, same with plane tickets.
Also similar to how restaurants are way more expensive. That's the gate.
Exactly. So once you have finished this class, you can at last not feel mad about airports for serving you the worst sandwich you've ever had at the highest price you've ever paid, because you understand what's going on. Is they're trying to make as much money as possible, and they know that it's easier for them to sell you a plane ticket that's cheaper, but then get you on the side with making you pay a bit more for your meal. But so that's just their practice of doing that, and they know that of course once you pass the gate, there's just no alternative but to just pay this huge outrageous price for your meal. Yeah, so I'm not completely done with this. I'm going to finish with the story about the Costco quantities, and then we can continue next time, unless there are additional questions. No, all right. So thanks a lot, everybody. And thanks. Oh, by the way, I haven't had time to upload the last class. That's, you're not dreaming. I was out of